programs and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution.radio, the #1 listener-supported internet radio on the internet, where freedom never sleeps. Today we have a great show. We're going to be talking about some Antarctic record temperatures and see if all the fear-mongering is real. We're going to be talking about the largest meteorite in modern history to ever have struck the Earth, and a new discovery, a new impact crater that happened in the Holocene is quite large, and another piece of evidence to add to the mounting evidence that Earth gets struck by large objects all the time, much more frequently than we are led to believe. In the second half of the show, we're going to be talking about the New Madrid Fault and the New Madrid earthquakes that occurred back in 1811 and 1812. And we are going to go over some historical accounts of what occurred over that 2-year period and then we're going to assume if it happened today and go over some ideas on what may happen if a New Madrid Fault earthquake were to happen today in the magnitude of 7.5 to 8 and the results. So we have a great show planned. Leah is not going to be joining us today. I'm riding solo. So let's dive into it by sharing the screen here. So you can rewatch the show later tonight over at Magnetic Reversal News on YouTube, 8 p.m. Mountain Time. And you can see all of the wonderful things we're going to be showing today during the radio show. Now, a recent article came out. There are multiple sources that have this headline. I'm going to read it for you now. Simply mind-boggling. World record temperature jump in Antarctic raises fears of catastrophe. I can't tell if I'm sharing the screen, so I'm just going to make sure that I'm sharing the screen. All right, beautiful. All right, so these headlines coming out that there was a world record temperature jump in Antarctica and it's raising fears of catastrophe. The second part of the headline says, an unprecedented leap of 38.5 degrees C in the coldest place on Earth is a harbinger of disaster for humans and the local ecosystem. This is nothing but fear porn and fear mongering in the headline. It's not based on any science. It's based on one guy, a science editor's opinion. This is an opinion piece. And let's go over the facts. On March of 2022, scientists at the Concordia Research Station on the East Antarctic Plateau documented a remarkable event. In fact, they recorded the largest jump in temperature ever measured. Well, that's ever measured at the site since they had a thermometer there, which is not that long. And according to their instruments, the region that day experienced a rise of 38.5 degrees C above the seasonal average, which is a world record. Now, what they're not telling you is the startling lack of data. Yeah, it only goes back a few decades at this particular site. So to say it's a world record is slightly disingenuous. Also, the headline saying that the unprecedented leap of 38.5 C in the coldest place on Earth is also misleading because even though there was a single spike in temperature, it was an anomaly. And what that means is it's not normal. What I'm showing up here is a year of data. No, it's actually showing 15 years of data laid over each other, going back to 2013. So their data set goes back to 2013. That's embarrassing. That's 11 years of data, and they're claiming a world record high. Now, if you watch tonight on Magnetic Reversal News, you're going to see on the chart that it appears to be an extreme anomaly and may even be an error. But it may not be, because what is happening is not significant. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, there's a couple things we need to talk about. The first one is that this is not an unprecedented heat wave in Antarctica as they're claiming. When you look at the graph, it only happened for a single day. And what actually was occurring was the breakdown of the polar vortex. We've seen this in the northern hemisphere due to the weakening magnetosphere of Earth. If you're listening now and you don't know, the Earth is currently in a magnetic excursion. We are halfway to the bottom of field strength. And at the bottom of these magnetic excursions, the field can either flip or flip back. It doesn't matter which it does. It's the low field strength that's the real doozy in these events, adding more UVA and UVB down on the surface. And what it also does is it causes a breakdown in the jet stream or weather patterns that are typically zonal, and they become meridional, meaning warm air from the tropical regions can push all the way into the Arctic or the Antarctic in this case. So there was a warm inflow. The Antarctic polar jet was weak and it broke in towards Antarctica just for a day. So this is not any alarming thing. When you look at the full data set here they have for the last 11 years, they're claiming a world record. It's simply an anomalous day. Now, the record high that was set was still 11.8, minus 11.8 C, far below freezing. So this temperature didn't even get Antarctica above freezing. In fact, Antarctica almost never is above freezing. The average temperature when it's warm is minus 30, and when it's cold is minus 70. So Antarctica is quite cold. The warmest you can find a day in Antarctica is typically in January, where it will hit minus 15 C. And this minus 11.8 C is very close to minus 15 C, is about the same type of temperature. So there is not a powerful and unprecedented heat wave. It was an anomalous single day where temperatures reached 15 degrees below zero. Yep. So I don't know what more to say about that, except that most of these so-called journalists that are writing this are doing it to get views from the brainwashed masses that are suffering from climate fear. Yeah. There's very few people that don't believe climate change is your fault. Isn't that sad? The entire world has been brainwashed over a period of 3 decades to believe that carbon dioxide, which is plant food, is heating the planet and we're all going to die because of plant food. That's basically the state of the world. And because of that, you need to write headlines like this to meet the needs of the brainwashed. All right, let's change the topic to something slightly more interesting and true. And this would be the largest meteorite fall in modern history. So up to date, this Sikhote Alin meteorite fall is the largest witnessed meteorite shower in modern times. If you didn't know, it occurred in eastern Siberia on February 12, 1947. In full daylight, a fireball moved from north to south, and at 10:38 local time a.m., fragmented into Earth's atmosphere. The debris from this meteor shower covered an elliptical area of 1.6 square kilometers on the snow-covered western spurs of the Sikhote Alin Mountains. And you're looking at the 3.7 gram Sikhote Alin individual in fine condition meteorite on the screen. So if you want to see that meteorite, you need to rewatch the program tonight on Magnetic Reversal News. Now, a Russian scientist, Kirnov, Fezkov, Shiplun, and Chechov, they collected numerous eyewitness records. And this is just a fascinating case, not only because it's the largest meteorite fall in modern history, but it's happening in an area where giant bolides seem to always be impacting. Now, I'm talking about 40 years earlier, the Tunguska event in a similar region. And we recently, I think in 2017 or 18, had the Chelyabinsk meteorite, which could have killed people, but because it fell in an unpopulated area, they got very lucky, and the only damage was some windows and buildings. So these 4 Russian scientists collected numerous eyewitness records from places up to 180 kilometers from the fall, and they provided extensive studies of the event. Now, due to their efforts, the Sikhote Alin is one of the best understood meteorite falls in history. The photos show representative individuals as collected by the first expeditions reaching the ground in mid-1947. The Russian mineralogist, cosmochemist E.L. Kirnow described the fieldwork and gave numerous photographs of the impact holes. Violently damaged trees of individual fragments were collected. I guess this was translated. It's very difficult to read. The pre-atmospheric size of Sikhote body was estimated to be about 1,000 metric tons, and more than 70 tons, including dust, is estimated to have reached the ground. That's quite a bit of meteoric material there. The complete breakup of the meteorite occurred at an altitude of just 4 to 6 kilometers, and 3 main stages of fragmentation have been determined. The first stage of fragmentation occurred while the body was moving with a significant cosmic velocity. Individual specimens separated during this event and received the highest amount of aerodynamic surface shaping. And that's what you're seeing here on these photos, aerodynamic surface shaking. Pretty cool. And to have witnessed this, it must have been spectacular to have a meteorite shower visible during the day. Now, in the second phase of fragmentation, some of the mass is separated during stage 1, again, fragmented. The cosmic velocity retained was sufficient to produce distinct remoglyphs. The last in-flight fragmentation occurred when the meteorite had almost lost all cosmic velocity, and the surfaces produced during this late stage of fragmentation show angular and irregular rough features with only little or no aerodynamic molding. And I guess that's what this piece is here. Take a look at that. All noted, it's quite interesting. And there is a YouTube video here on the Sikhote Alin meteorite by the Russian Academy of Sciences from YouTube that we will link below. It's a 17-minute video documentary, and it covers the first 3 expeditions sent to the fall site of the Sikhote Alin meteorite on behalf of the Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow from 1947 to 1950. And due to all of this study and all of the expeditions, tons and tons of meteorite samples were recovered, and they are fantastic, making this, the Sikhote Alin meteorite, one of the most studied and impressive and largest meteorites to have hit the Earth. So we will link you below to all of the information, all of the papers, and the YouTube video tonight on Magnetic Reversal News. Now let's talk about another impact structure before we get into the New Madrid fault and some of those historic accounts. Now we're talking about the Luna structure in India. This is a probable impact crater that was formed by an iron bolide. So confirmation of Luna as an impact crater upticked the limited numbers of craters in India. And the reason no one had determined this was a meteorite strike was because no one had really done any studies. If we look at the Luna structure, if I can open this image, we can only download. Oh, look at that's terrible. All right, so if we look at the structure here, it is clearly an impact structure. You can even see the direction the bolide came in here, from left to right, and causing that high rim on the western side. So because there was no scientific study, no one had ever realized that this could potentially be a meteorite. The lunar structure of India, in fact, had been rumored to be an impact crater for more than a decade without any convincing evidence. Now, the structure, which we just showed you, is approximately 1.5 to 1.8 kilometers across. It's prominently visible in the low-lying Bani Plains of the tectonically active Kutch Basin as a circular morphologic feature with a less prominent rim. The lunar area is strewn with melt-like rocks having high specific gravity and displaying a wide range of magnetic properties. It contains minerals like wustite, kirschenite, ulospinel, hercynite, phaelite, and the whole rock analysis denotes PGE enrichment. And that means heavy earth elements in high quantities. Take a look at this: iridium, palladium, rubidium, plutonium. So clearly this is a unique situation here. And just based on that data alone, I would have concluded that it is cosmogenic in origin, meaning something from outer space hit the region. The mineralogical and geochemical signatures all point to an impact crater, which is rich in clay with elevated calcium and silica. And geochemical data suggests an iron or stony meteorite as the potential projectile at Luna. The silt layer containing plant remnants underlying the strewn layer yielded a radiocarbon age of 6,905 years ago, making Luna the biggest crater to result from an iron bolide in the last 10,000 years that we know of. And I want to stress that we know of. In fact, if we know all of the large craters from bolides, there would probably be dozens this size in the last 10,000 years. The problem is that we live on Earth, an extremely dynamic planet with tons of different weathering processes. And so if, let's say, for example, you were to dig a giant hole in the ground 100 feet deep and next to it put the pile of dirt 100 feet high, what do you think that would look like in 100 years? Well, because of rain, much of the hole would be filled in and much of the pile would be starting to weather. What do you think it would look like in 1,000 years? It might not even be noticeable. The hole may have been filled in and it may just be like a shallow depression. But in 6,905 years, what do you think it would look like? It would probably not be visible. And if many of these impactors, in fact, hit the ocean, which the average depth of the ocean is thousands of feet, it probably would have never even hit the bottom, creating a crater. So that being said, the discovery of the lunar structure as being an impact crater is just confirming that large objects hit the Earth all the time, which is what Lee and I have been trying to get to the bottom of for years, to bring that information to you. Now, how did they prove this is an impact crater? It's pretty simple, and you're going to learn some geology here. Two of the most famous minerals ever, coesite and stishovite, were found. What are coesite and stishovite, you might ask? Well, they are simply quartz crystals that get rearranged with a new lattice structure that makes it ever more dense. So coesite is a form of quartz, silicon dioxide, that has a different crystal lattice than standard quartz. And stishovite also is a type of quartz that has a different lattice than standard quartz, and it's tighter. Both of the lattice structures in coesite and stishovite are tighter. And this is due to the high temperature and pressure needed to form them. So here's the scenario. A giant iron bolide is headed towards Earth, and when it hits the ground, the area it hits is sandstone, or mostly quartz, whatever's there. And when it impacts, it changes that quartz SiO2 into coesite or stishovite, a denser version of quartz. And this can only happen in extreme high temperatures and pressures that are created during impacts. So to reiterate, these minerals, coesite and stishovite, are high-pressure, metastable polymorphs of quartz. And they first became known not studying impact craters, but as a result of laboratory synthesis. Isn't that amazing? Coesite was synthesized in 1953 and stishovite in 1961. And they are named by Sossman in 1954 and Chow et al. 1962 for their discoverers, L. Coase and S.M. Stishov, respectively. The unit cell of coesite has 6 and stishovite has 2 SiO2 formula units. So it takes 6 SiO2s to make a coesite, and it just takes 2 SiO2s to make a stishovite. Now, coesite is similar to quartz and other low-density forms of silicon atom tetrahedrally bonded to 4 oxygen atoms, each of which is shared by a silicon atom in an adjoining tetrahedron. Now, this more compact structure increases the density of the quartz-like mineral. So, because of the shared silicon atom and the adjoining tetrahedron, a 9.1% greater density occurs in coesite at 2.911 grams per cc relative to quartz. And this is due to a more efficient packing of the silicon-oxygen tetrahedra. Now, coesite is monoclinic, optically positive, and has refractive indices of 1.599 and 1.604. The low solubility of coesite in dilute hydrofluoric acid permits concentration of coesite from mixtures with lower density silica materials. Now, stishovite is even more dense, 47.3% denser at 4.28 grams per cc. Amazing. So these two quartz-like minerals are cosmogenic in origin and only can be formed in high pressure and temperature. There are some other scenarios on Earth that they may form, including volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. So the coesite and stishovite in earthquakes would be deep in the subsurface on a fault line as the fault rubs along its boundary in what is called a slick-inside region. So you'd be crushing and squeezing the quartz there, and if it's the right temperature and pressure, you could get these minerals. Also, volcanic eruptions. Large volcanic eruptions can produce the pressure and temperature needed for coesite and stishovite, but typically they are found in relation to shocked quartz and other things to suggest impact, like a crater, just like this one. So the coesite and stishovite would be found within the crater or perhaps blown out in the strewn field. So that was your lesson for the day, and it is the discovery of coesite and stishovite in the lunar structure that has confirmed its cosmogenic origin, meaning an impact. Leave a comment below if you are rewatching this video. So now we are going to shift gears. We're going to be talking about the New Madrid earthquakes of 1811 and 1812. There were 4 main shocks. December 16th, 1811, approximately a 7.7 magnitude, and is considered the main shock. That same day, a 7 magnitude occurred, which is considered an aftershock, December 16th, 1811. Shortly thereafter, about 5 weeks later, January 23rd of 1812, another main shock at around 7.5 occurred. And then a month after that, can you believe it? It's actually only 2 weeks later, February 7th, 1812, in the middle of the night, the largest potentially of the earthquakes, a 7.7 or greater main shock occurred. Now you can imagine that over this period of time, 3 months, we have 4 7 magnitude or greater earthquakes in a single region on Earth. Can you imagine that? Now, why and how did this occur? There are many papers on the New Madrid fault zone. There are many papers on the earthquakes and the fault systems. But why? Why is it in the center of a plate? We're not on a plate margin here. How do we have a major fault system and large earthquakes in the middle of a plate? Well, the explanation you may believe or may not believe. But if you come up here and look at the Great Lakes, this is actually forming a rift. There is a rift in the center of our plate that goes all the way down through the Mississippi Valley, up here through the Great Lakes, and out through Canada. This rift valley is called a failed rift, and it is supposedly supposed to have formed millions, tens, hundreds of millions of years ago during a period of supercontinent like Pangea. And as the supercontinent was breaking apart, the North American plate in the center started to rip apart. Now, this could have formed a new mid-ocean ridge, and there could be an ocean in the center of the U.S. if this kept going, but the rift failed and stopped. And the mid-ocean ridge in the Atlantic was the winner, and it began opening. A divergent plate boundary formed on the east coast of the U.S., which is now all the way in the middle of the Atlantic, called the mid-ocean ridge. So this rift failed and stopped spreading, and that led to a huge fault system moving up and down the Appalachians. So this failed rift is their explanation for the fault systems in and around south. It's about 100 miles south of St. Louis. If this were to happen today, the catastrophe would be uncomprehendable. That's the best way I can put it. So back in 1811 and 12, a series of 4, not 3, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, it says 3 large earthquakes, but because they are not considering the aftershock on December 16th, an earthquake. It's an aftershock. So they're only considering the initial shock on December 16th, the initial shock on January 23rd, and the initial shock on February 7th. Just to clear that up. So there were 4 large earthquakes that occurred near New Madrid, Missouri, between December 1811 and February 1812. There were thousands of aftershocks, of which 1,874 were large enough to be felt in Louisville, Kentucky. That's 190 miles away. The number of lives lost from the earthquakes remains unknown. However, scholars note that the number was probably not great because the region had only a sparse rural population. In fact, this region was owned by France right before the earthquake and only made it into the United States' hands about 5 years prior to the series of earthquakes through the Louisiana Purchase. So if you didn't know that, now you know. They actually bought that land from France. They didn't take it from the natives, as most people assume. The French took it from the natives and then sold it to the U.S. All right. So there's no real way to know how many lives were lost because there weren't a lot of people out there. It was mostly Native Americans and a few settlers and some explorers, and we'll get to some of those historical accounts in just a minute. Now, the earthquakes and their aftershocks took place within a large region called the New Madrid Seismic Zone. And you can see the New Madrid Seismic Zone here on the map. This is an area of high earthquake risk running from northeastern Arkansas and northwestern Tennessee to southeastern Missouri and southwestern Kentucky. Magnitude estimates for each of the 3 major earthquakes associated with the 1811-12 earthquake sequence vary widely. Now, this is because they rely on historical accounts and analysis of the present-day landscape, rather than data provided by modern seismic instrumentation, because there wasn't any, probably. Now, there are ranges based on the observations geologically and historically. And so let's get to those. So the initial shock, December 16th, 1811, ranged from 6.7 to 8.1, based on all the data, which is a huge range. An 8.1 is thousands of times more violent than a 6.7. Whereas the ranges for the earthquakes of January 23rd and February 7th, 1812 were higher, 6.8 to 7.8 and 7.0 to 8.8 respectively. So clearly the February 7th, 1812 quake was the big one, and it was the last one in a series of earthquakes. So that means the prior quakes were pre-shocks to the main shock, which is the last of the three big events. Absolutely fascinating. More precise figures have been presented by the USGS. Magnitude 7.7 for the December quake, and magnitude 7.5 and 7.7 for the January quake. And February quake, sorry. So scholars do agree, however, the New Madrid earthquakes were the strongest such events recorded in North America east of the Rockies ever. Well, except for the millions of ice bolides that smashed down on North America during the Younger Dryas event, creating the Carolina Bays. That would have been equivalent to like a 9 magnitude earthquake continuously for hours. So, good thing we're not alive back then. Let's talk about the first earthquake. The main shock that occurred at 2:15 a.m., and these are all occurring in the middle of the night, these poor people. The main shock that occurred at 2:15 a.m. on December 16th, 1811, was a result of slippage along the Cottonwood Grove Fault in northeastern Arkansas. It was followed by at least 3 large aftershocks with magnitudes ranging from 6.0 to 7 over the course of the next 48 hours. Must have been a terrifying 48 hours in the days prior to Christmas in 1811 for anyone in this region. Despite the strength of the tremors, only minor damage to human-made structures was reported, from collapsing chimneys, falling trees, and cracking timbers in houses. Some areas sank while others were uplifted. Fissures opened up in the ground. Some were filled with water from the nearby Mississippi River or wetlands, which was later expelled high into the air when the fissures closed. Soil liquefaction caused large sand blows that fouled farmland in Missouri, Tennessee, and Arkansas. On the Mississippi River itself, the shaking calved the soil along the riverbanks and caused trees lining the river to fall in. Large waves formed on the water that capsized numerous boats and thrust others onto land. Now, since the rocks in the eastern U.S. have few active faults to interrupt the propagation of seismic waves, ground vibrations from earthquakes generated in this region may travel thousands of miles. We just saw that with a very small earthquake occurring in northern Jersey that was felt in New York City and Philadelphia. Okay. Shortly after the earthquake began, the ground shaking was felt as far away as Canada and in the north of the Gulf Coast. Eyewitness accounts noted that the shaking rang church bells as far away as Boston, Massachusetts, and brought down chimneys in Cincinnati, Ohio, 360 miles away. The president at the time, James Madison, is said to have felt the seismic waves arriving in Washington, D.C. Amazing. In 2011, the results of a report prepared by the USGS noted that residents within an area of approximately 232,000 square miles experienced very strong ground shaking. And people living in an area roughly 1 million square miles experienced shaking that was intense enough to frighten them. If this were to happen today, the devastation would be so unimaginable that it would be unimaginable. The strongest aftershock, a magnitude 7.0 tremor that became known as the dawn aftershock, occurred later that day at 7:15 a.m. The epicenter of that aftershock is a matter of some debate. Some earth scientists noted that it was located in northeastern Arkansas, where others maintain it was located in northwestern Tennessee, near the southern end of the Reelfoot Fault, a large fault running northwest-southeast within the Reelfoot Rift, the region I was talking about at the beginning of this section. Now, eyewitness reports that shaking from this aftershock, the dawn aftershock, was severe, especially in New Bourbon, Missouri, but not as strong as the main shock. Like the main shock, however, seismic waves from this event were also felt in all the major cities along the eastern seaboard. Let's move on to the earthquake of January 23rd, 1812. So this is going to be just about 6 weeks later. The January 23rd, now can you imagine? So 6 weeks, people are just recovering from the event. Everything probably looks, devastated. And then another one occurs. At this point, you got to be thinking, I got to get out of here. The January 23rd event was the smallest of the three principal earthquakes. The main shock occurred at 9:15 a.m., and its magnitude estimated at 7.5. This is the same magnitude of the earthquake that just hit Taiwan, toppling buildings and killing many people. The location of this earthquake, the January 23rd, 1812 quake, the epicenter is controversial, but it's thought to have been located in the vicinity of New Madrid, Missouri, along a fault that runs perpendicular to the Reelfoot Fault. So it seems like two faults moved and they put pressure on faults that are perpendicular to them, and then this happens. No appreciable damage to residents was reported in the January 23rd, 1812 quake. However, landscape changes, similar to those that occurred during the December 16th event, are thought to have taken place. So this just shows you that's the amount of information they know about this second quake. It's not a lot. There's, in fact, more historical information than scientific. And we will get to that shortly. Hopefully we have time for some of the good stuff. Now, the third principal quake on February 7th, 1812, according to many, matched or exceeded the strength and severity of the December 16th event. And based on geology and how earthquake series works, if this is in fact the main quake, the other two were pre-quakes to the main quake. And so I would say that the February 7th, 1812 quake probably exceeded the strength of the December 16th event. That's just my opinion. The shock of this earthquake, whose epicenter was also located, guess where? Near New Madrid, Missouri, shook the region once again overnight at 3:45 a.m. and resulted in the destruction of New Madrid. Structural damage also occurred in St. Louis, Missouri, where several chimneys fell because of the ground vibration. Now, if New Madrid had not been destroyed in the prior two quakes and destroyed during this quake, I think that's all the evidence you need that the February 7th, 1812 quake exceeded all of the quakes. It is the one that destroyed New Madrid. And 120 miles north knocked down chimneys in St. Louis, for goodness sakes. Now, damage to the landscape during this quake included the warping of the ground through subsidence and uplift with sand blows, ground cracking, landslides, stream bank calving, and more. Lake St. Francis in Arkansas, a water body formed by subsidence that followed earlier earthquakes associated with the New Madrid seismic zone, expanded. Flatboat operators reported that the flow of the Mississippi River was suddenly reversed. However, scientific studies performed since that time note that the tremors produced northward moving water waves that gave the illusion that the river reversed its course. The upthrusting of the land some 15 miles to the south of the epicenter pushed water into a basin that dropped 5 to 20 feet and created the massive Reelfoot Lake, which is now located near Tiptonville, Tennessee. And this lake is pretty interesting because you've seen videos of, I think, trees getting sucked into it. And so here is Reelfoot Lake, which was formed as a result of the New Madrid earthquake and the Mississippi River flowing in there into that depression. Fascinating. Now, this is the most controversial topic of the New Madrid. People want to know what caused it. And, well, nobody knows. Over the past 4,500 years, a number of major earthquakes of magnitude 7 and 8 have occurred in this seismic zone. The events include clusters of large earthquakes that have been dated to 2350 BCE, 900 CE, and 1450 CE, and then 1811, which seems like about every 400 or 500 years, there is a periodicity now, and we are not anywhere near that. So maybe 2200, it'll fault again. The region experienced 2 large earthquakes since 1812. One located in Charleston, Missouri. Did you know that? On October 31st, 1895, a 6.7 occurred near Charleston, Missouri. And another earthquake located near Lepanto, Arkansas, occurred January 5th, 1843, with a magnitude of 7.6. So even though there's a 500-year periodicity on large clusters of quakes in the New Madrid zone, every 50 years or so, a large 6.5 or greater quake can occur in Arkansas or Missouri. And we are long overdue for that, folks. So even though we can date these earthquakes using stratigraphy and other markers, why they occurred is not well understood, and a number of hypotheses have been posited to explain their occurrence. So far from a tectonic plate boundary, as we alluded to earlier, some earth scientists suggest that the faulting of the New Madrid seismic zone is the result of an underground hotspot, a section of Earth's upper mantle that upwells to melt through the crust. Other scholars maintain that the weakening of the Earth's crust in the area was caused by downcutting of the Mississippi River between 10 and 16,000 years ago. Compelling evidence also exists to support the notion that the earthquakes arose from activity occurring along the Reelfoot Rift, an ancient subterranean rift zone thought to have developed 500 million years ago after geologic forces pulled the region apart and then failed. Adherence to this hypothesis suggests that after hundreds of millions of years of relative inactivity, the pressure along the faults have again built up from the east-west compression of the North American plate. Whatever the explanation is, the question is not if, but when the next earthquake will occur. There are many famous historical accounts, including an account from Davy Crockett, who was in the region at the time. If you think Davy Crockett is a fictitious character, you would in fact be incorrect. Davy Crockett was an American folk hero, frontiersman, soldier, and politician He is often referred to in popular culture as the king of the wild frontier, and he represented Tennessee in the U.S. House of Representatives. He grew up in East Tennessee, where he gained a reputation for hunting, storytelling, and his coonskin cap. And Davy Crockett was in the area during the earthquake. We're going to get to his account, but first I want to play you this. So you can clearly see from this account, and we're going to leave you links below, just some of the horrors of what was going on here. Well, let's read a little bit about Davy Crockett, and then we'll sum this all up. Davy Crockett was there, and this is some of his account. Ground shaking caused the deep, soft soil of this vast floodplain region to separate like the runny egg casserole if you took it out of the oven and shook it side to side. Amazing. Seeking an outlet, this liquefied sand shot up through the clay underlayer and dirt of the surface into fountains of liquefied sand, which created immense round sand blows, which were volcano-like, rounded cones of white sand fed by a central channel or sand dike. So I don't think that there was any volcanic activity happening here, but the activity was so unique with these blowholes and cracks opening and filling with water and shutting and then shooting the water into the sky that it appeared to be volcanic. There are another account by John Shaw. Here's about a dozen accounts and eyewitnesses of New Madrid. We'll link you below. These were all in the paper. And this is the personal narrative of Colonel John Shaw of Marquette County, Wisconsin. This was contained in the second annual report and collections of the State Historical Society. While lodging about 30 miles north of New Madrid on the 14th of December at 2 o'clock in the morning occurred a heavy shock of an earthquake. The house where I was stopping was partly of wood and partly of brick structure. The brick portion all fell, but I and the family all fortunately escaped unhurt. At the still greater shock, about 2 o'clock in the morning on the 7th of February, 1812, I was in New Madrid when nearly 2,000 people of all ages fled in terror from their falling dwellings. In that place and the surrounding country, and directed their course north about 30 miles to Taiwapeti Hill on the western bank of the Mississippi, and about 7 miles back from the river. This was the first high ground above New Madrid, and here the fugitives formed an encampment. It was proposed that all should kneel and engage in supplicating God's mercy, and all simultaneously, Catholics and Protestants, knelt and offered silent prayer to their Creator. They were terrified. About 12 miles back towards New Madrid, a young woman about 17 years of age named Betsy Masters had been left by her parents and family, her leg having been broken below the knee by falling of one of the weight poles of the roof of the cabin and through a total stranger. I was the only person who could consent to return to see whether she still survived. Wow, they just left her. So you can imagine if something like this were to happen today, the destruction would be unprecedented. And just in New Madrid alone, the entire city was destroyed. And amazingly, almost everyone survived. Today, they wouldn't be so lucky, unfortunately. An event like this and in this region would kill hundreds of thousands of people, probably instantly, because most of the structures in this area are not major earthquake proofed. Although many are, there are still plenty of older structures that are not. And the infrastructure in this region alone, just think about what crosses the Mississippi River here. So for a distance of hundreds of miles, all of the bridges would probably be destroyed. And so there would be no way to get across the Mississippi River here. And then think about the debris. We just saw the debris from a single bridge in Delaware that is going to take months to remove. Now, what if all of the bridges fall? And think of all of the debris here. Think of the pipelines going across the Mississippi. There are thousands of oil and gas pipelines that cross the river. They will crack. They will rupture. Crude oil will dump into the Mississippi River. It will be toxic, and it will all flow down through Mississippi and Louisiana, and all that toxic waste will enter the Gulf of Mexico. That is going to happen. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Many people live in this region. Some people are even moving to this region to prepare for the coming times. This is the worst place you could possibly ever be. The West Coast, the New Madrid fault zone, and the East Coast. Those are no-go zones. If you're looking for a safe geophysical place, it is nowhere near the Mississippi River. That's boom. Great show. Watch the replay on Magnetic Reversal News tonight and support Revolution Radio.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And we'll be right back after this message.